you don't want to have, but this one is definitely up there. If it's not the most, it's definitely one of the most, and that's not my saying it. That is what the biblical scholars, what the rabbis have said, what the Christian scholars have said over the years. It is a very disturbing story. We're going to post this up right now. We're going to get everybody up on Facebook if they want to join this today. We're going to jump into it, and then we'll talk a little bit about the story, where it exists in the framework of Jewish history, where it exists in the framework of biblical scholarship. I will tell you this: the story, I would say many biblical scholars will tell you that there's at least a kernel of truth to this story. Maybe, again, one of the stories that was a late composition, was written fairly late. And I will tell you that one of the reasons that people say that is, who would make up a story like this? Why would anyone have a story that depicts the Israelites so badly? And again, as I've said before, for those who have read Genesis or are reading Genesis with us, we just read the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in the last couple of weeks. This story is probably actually the basis for Sodom and Gomorrah, even though Sodom and Gomorrah was written chronologically, takes place during the time of Abraham, obviously, in the book of Genesis. It's thought that this story actually was like the way we told the Sodom story was based on this incident. Not that the story of Sodom and Gomorrah was also maybe based on a kernel of truth, as we talked about it, maybe was also based on the recent archaeological evidence that we found, the scientific evidence that proved the destruction by probably, again, a meteor of the area around the Dead Sea, that our ancestors took this story of, some people call it the Levite's concubine. There's no name for the story, by the way, really. I just want to tell you, like, they really call it the story of the Levites. There's no name for this story other than to kind of describe, the people know it's Judges 19 through 21, that they actually took that story and then merged it with the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah by divine means and created the Sodom and Gomorrah story, which is definitely the more well-known story. This story isn't as well known. It's not studied or discussed as much. It's not ignored, by the way. We'll get to that too. It's not like, Jews said we can't read this story, but it's definitely not as well known. The characters aren't named, but it is the last 3 chapters of the book of Judges. And as we're going to see, there is no judge. So when we talk about why this story is where it is, the chronology of when it takes place is before the king, before our first kings, but but there is no judge, and there was no judge in the last story that we've read, the story of the Micah's idols, we call it. Also, there's no name for it. There's no judge. It's not like Samson or Jephthah or Ehud or Gideon or Deborah. None of those judges that we have by name. The last 2 stories, 17, 18, and then 19 through 21, there is no judge named. Some people call it the epilogue of the book. Many people would say it's the reason that the book of Judges actually exists. These 2 stories, the last 5 chapters, explain why we have to have kings and why we went off the rails. So with that, let's take a gander and let's do some reading. We are sending out an email later today, my friends, to celebrate the wonderful news for one of our people that are on here. She's not on screen, so I know she's there because I see her name. Francine will be announcing some wonderful news for her. She is the proud grandmother. Her and Bob are the proud grandparents now of twin girls. Some of you have heard that. But also a very exciting announcement just from the last 2 days of this new year, 3 days. Her son Joey is engaged. We're very excited for Francine's many joyous events, which we are going to send out, because we send out a lot of unfortunate news emails, but we're going to send out a great news email. And we waited for this combination. We thought that this was in the offing, and indeed it is such that Joey and Shauna are engaged, and she's very excited. I know Francine, very excited lady.
Hi. We are, this has been the happiest time for us in a long time. And there'll be pictures, two pictures, one of Joey and Shauna. Shauna is so sweet and they're so well matched in their nature, Joey and Shauna. Joey was lonely for a long time, and I'm so happy for him that he met someone that I think they'll always appreciate each other, and they really love each other. And when he proposed, she wasn't actually even looking at the ring. She was just looking at him. So that tells you a lot about her. And he's very, very happy. And that's all we really care about for our children, that they're happy. And the twins are absolutely adorable. And so we're very happy.
What are the babies going to call you, Francine? Are you
well, I'd like to be, they take their own name, but my preference is not grandma and is not Nana, but is Nama, because Robert named his grandmother Ruth, not my mother, but Bob's mother, Nama. It was Nama and Dampa. So we'll see what happens.
Well, congratulations. That's wonderful news. Joey lived in Israel for a little while. He's back working hard as an accountant. He's a great young man. And I told you a long time ago not to worry about him. I begged you not to worry that he would find a good partner, and it seems like he 100% has. I can take no responsibility for this shidduch, other than the fact that I did introduce him to somebody. That one didn't work out, but no. I told you not to give up, and you did not, and it's all worked out. And with that, now we get to read one of the most disturbing rape murder stories in the entire Bible.
Well,
so,
before I start, Shauna is Shauna. Her name is Shauna Bornstein, so you can figure out her background, and she is a newborn ICU nurse, and she received an award after being a nurse at her hospital for 2 years as being the top nurse in the whole hospital. So she's very, very good, and she has she's just so sweet. She's from day one. I mean, I won't go anymore.
I'll stop. Listen, you have a lot of reasons to be proud, and you're a proud grandma, and now a proud addition to your family. That's awesome news. So again, let's have a lot of good news in 2022. So as I said, we're going to now read the most disturbing story, arguably, and if it's not the most disturbing, it's way up there. So this is Judges chapter 19, the last 3 chapters of Judges. Rosemary, would you do us the honor of taking us down this dark hole of tragedy and weirdness?
Not looking forward to this, but here goes. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a Levite residing at the other end of the hill country of Ephraim took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. Once his concubine deserted him, leaving him for her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah, and she stayed there a full 4 months. Then her husband set out with an attendant and a pair of donkeys and went after her to woo her and to win her back. She admitted him into her father's house, And when the girl's father saw him, he received him warmly. His father-in-law, the girl's father, pressed him, and he stayed with him 3 days. They ate and drank and lodged there. Early in the morning of the 4th day, he started to leave, but the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Eat something to give you strength, then you can leave." So the two of them sat down and they feasted together. Then the girl's father said to the man, "Won't you stay overnight and enjoy yourself?" The man started to leave, but his father-in-law kept urging him until he turned back and spent the night there. Early in the morning of the 5th day, he was about to leave when the girl's father said, "Come, have a bite." The two of them ate, dawdling until past noon. Then the man, his concubine, and his attendant started to leave. His father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Look, the day is waning toward evening. Do stop for the night. See, the day is declining. Spend the night here and enjoy yourself. You can start early tomorrow on your journey and head for home." But the man refused to stay for the night. He set out and traveled as far as the vicinity of Jebus, that is Jerusalem. He had with him a pair of laden donkeys, and his concubine was with him.
Okay, so that's the first part of the story. It's a weird kind of 10 it's a lot of verses. It's 10 verses about a guy whose concubine leaves him, and he goes and he basically fetches her from her father's house. So there's a couple of things that we learn about life in those days. One of them being that concubines, again, the word for it in Hebrew is pilegesh. This pilegesh is seems very much like a wife. There doesn't seem to be a huge difference between the way that she interacts with him and the way a wife would interact. First of all, she leaves him, right? She goes back to her father. Her father seems to want her to stay. It's not like she had gotten thrown out of the house. The commentary on this is interesting because of where the story is going to go. But so far, the story just kind of seems like a family squabble that a lot of families deal with. It doesn't seem like anything that out of the ordinary is happening. And that's part of what's interesting about this story, is that it starts off in a very kind of mundane way. Now, I will tell you that because of what happens, there are people who kind of try to figure out, is there something else happening here in this story that we don't know about, right? And so what's interesting is that some people say, when we read the very beginning of this story, that that when she left him, when she left her husband, she was cheating on him. That is primarily actually, interestingly, more of the Christian tradition on this, which is that she abandons him or cheats on him with another man. That's not often where the Jewish commentary goes on this in the Talmud, and there's not a lot of discussion of the story in the Midrash and Talmud, but there is some. And one of the interesting kind of Midrashim takes on this is what happened here between the concubine and her husband. And so one of the things that they say is that she made him a meal that he didn't like. And there's actually a rabbinic discussion, an argument. Was there a hair in the soup or was there a fly in the soup? There literally is like, well, maybe it was there and then the other thing was there. Let's try to rectify what ticked him off. But the key thing is that it was him. It was the husband, or the man of the house, if you will, who overreacted and sets into a chain of motion a story that goes downhill real quick and real bad. And so the blame is actually put onto the guy, partly because it was what we're going to see is this, just the story itself is just so horrible that I think to some extent, the commentators, at least in the Jewish commentators, didn't want him to kind of, he didn't want to get a, like there was a justification for what happens, because it's such a bad thing that there's no justification. I don't want to build it up too much without reading it, but I just want to explain kind of why people look at this and go, what's going on here? Why did she leave him? Well, we also know about this story right from the beginning, that there was no king in Israel. And that's the way the last stories began too, chapter 17 and 18, the Micah's idol story, which, by the way, in the kicker of that story, for those who were not here a couple of weeks ago, the crazy end of that story is that Israelites were making idols. That's bad. They were moving into areas that they were not originally necessarily given, or where they were moving. The Danites move up north. That's part of the story. They also wipe out a group of people that seem to be kind of minding their own business, though again, it's not like it's not in the promised land, but there seems to be some editorial comment that they could have left these people alone. And they also threaten and kidnap people, and it's just a bad story. And it also begins with this: there was no king in Israel, which is going to kind of get to the point where we're going to see there's no king in Israel, and everyone is doing whatever they want to do. And you'll see that by the end of the story. We also see a Levite. This is a Levite who is living in Ephraim, and he is married to a concubine who is from Judah. And so we see Judites, we see Levites, we see Ephraim as an area, and we also are going to see the Benjaminites involved in this story, because that's where the story actually takes place, in the tribe of Benjamin. But we see these big tribes involved. Benjamin is not a big tribe, but they're a central tribe. They're the tribe of the area of Jerusalem. Ephraim, very important tribe in the north, the most important tribe arguably in the north, the largest tribe, and Judah, the most important tribe of the south. And so these are also tribal stories that kind of establish the power dynamic during the time of the judges, and even going into the time of kings. Keep that in mind. There's also some politics of ancient Israel involved here. And the background, though, we have the politics, but the story of a family is what kicks everything into gear. And that is kind of the crazy thing that we're going to see, is that one family's, and again, a family that's not even really named, are going to kick into gear something that is just horrific. And we will take a look at this story. Oh, so here's where we left off. They are traveled as far as Jerusalem, which at that time was still a Jebusite Canaanite city controlled by this Canaanite group, the Jebusites, who seem to be living there peacefully. One of those Canaanite peoples that we kind of like made a pact with and allowed them to live. That is a major city, obviously. It's going to be our capital. Right now, it's still inhabited by the Jebusites. And it is, by the way, inhabited by the Jebusites when King David marches in there and literally makes it his capital. It's still a Jebusite city. And he seems to have let the Jebusites live there too, by the way. Anyways, so these are the Jebusites who are living there in the territory of Benjamin. And here's what happens. Oh, well, we'll see what happens. Political things in the background, again, that we're going to learn. Here we go.
Since they were close to Jebus, and the day was very far spent, the attendant said to his master, "Let us turn aside to this town of the Jebusites and spend the night in it." But his master said to him, "We will not turn aside to a town of aliens who are not of Israel, but will continue to Gibeah."
But this is obviously going to be something really important. That line right there. That's a line that literally sticks out and calls your attention. Wow, that's a pretty harsh line, right? Let's not go to Jerusalem. Let's not go to the Jebusite town. We don't want to go to a town of aliens who aren't of Israel. We don't want to be around a bunch of those guys. let's go to Gibeah, the city that is inhabited by Benjamin, the Benjaminite capital, if you will, right outside of Jerusalem. We looked at this on a map when we kind of looked at Gibeah when it was mentioned earlier. It's literally in Jerusalem today, Gibeah. It is an area actually in the eastern side of Jerusalem metropolitan area, which is pretty much Palestinian, Arab, and then around it are some Jewish settlements, some Jewish areas inhabited by Jews. But it's all part of the disputed area of Jerusalem, in the sense that whatever discussions about what Jerusalem will look like one day, Gibeah, interestingly, is really, for the most part, or for a large part, kind of part Palestinian, part Israel. So it's an interesting area today. Looking on a map, it is part of the patchwork of what is Jerusalem. But anyways, this is right outside, but they don't go to Jerusalem, which is Canaanite at the time. They go to Gibeah. So here's the kicker.
Come, he said to his attendant, let us approach one of those places and spend the night either in Gibeah or in Ramah. So they traveled on, and the sun set when they were near Gibeah of Benjamin. They turned off there and went in to spend the night in Gibeah. He went and sat down in the town square, but nobody took them indoors to spend the night.
Yeah. No, at this point, we're seeing the same things that we saw earlier in the story in Genesis of Sodom and Gomorrah. Right away, we're hit with these eerie reminders, which again, if it's the fact that this story happened and then we went back and wrote the version of Sodom and Gomorrah, what we see is a guy who comes to the Jewish town, the Benjaminite town of Gibeah, and says, well, man, there's nobody here taking us in. We're here as strangers in another Israelite town, and we're sitting there waiting in town square. And nobody takes us.
So it's a hospitality issue.
Yep. And this is what we saw in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is that, people focus on the rape and on that, but it really starts off with the fact that it's the hospitality, the juxtaposition of what Abraham does by letting people come into his tent, by taking care of people, by washing their feet, by feeding them. And these people are now sitting outside in the square and no one is taking care of them. And that's where it starts. It starts from this lack of hospitality, this lack of following the basic decency of taking care of people. Now, again, it's a city. It's not a tent. It's not where this started, which was back in the day when people would come to a tent and they had to be allowed to come in. Otherwise, they die out in the desert. Okay, we get it. There's a transition to a more cosmopolitan lifestyle, and it's not working. It's not working in the sense that people are not following the basic rules of hospitality and taking care of society, taking care of your people. So that's not happening. So this is almost exactly the way the story of the angels happened, with Lot taking the people in, right? So this story, go back to, and again, it's weird. It's chapter 19. It was not like we put in the chapters and verses. It didn't have to be chapter 19 of Genesis and chapter 19 of Judges, but it is. Makes it real easy to remember. And it is, again, this right now, it's literally just replacing Sodom and Gomorrah with, or Sodom in this case, it's really just Sodom in the story, with Gibeah. Okay, so.
In the evening, an old man.
Jerusalem. Yeah, sorry.
In the evening, an old man came along from his property outside the town. This man hailed from the hill country of Ephraim and resided at Gibeah, where the townspeople were Benjaminites. He happened to see the wayfarer in the town square. Where, the old man inquired, are you going to, and where do you come from? He replied, we are traveling from Bethlehem in Judah to the other end of the hill country of Ephraim. That is where I live. I made a journey to Bethlehem of Judah, and now I am on my way to the house of the Lord, and nobody has taken me indoors.
Yeah, so it seems to be again that it says he lives in Ephraim, in the area of Ephraim, and he meets another guy who's from he's from that area. It says the man hailed from the hill country of Ephraim, so he's from his same area. They have that in common. But he's living among the Benjaminites, and now he's stopped in a Benjaminite city. So you can see that even though there are tribes that are, this part is Benjamin, this part is Ephraim, this part is Judah, that people are moving around. They're not necessarily staying only in their tribal areas, that people can move, and that they have a connection, right? They maybe they talked about their favorite restaurants in Ephraim, their favorite hangouts. So that place, yeah, we always go over to Shaul's in the hill country of Ephraim, and so they have a connection, right? So they meet, they have a connection. He says, I'm making this journey. Nobody's taking me in, right? So, already he's starting to feel kind of a little desperate. It was his idea not to go to Jerusalem, to the Jebusite city. And now he's regretting it because there's nobody taking us in. So he's now stuck for the night. What's he going to do?
We have both bruised straw and feed for our donkeys, and bread and wine for me and your handmaid, and for the attendant with your servants. We lack nothing. Rest easy, said the old man. Let me take care of all your needs. Do not on any account spend the night in the square. And he took him into his house. He mixed fodder for the donkeys. Then they bathed their feet and ate and drank.
Basic human dignity. Taking care of your guests, does all this stuff that you need to do. I'll take care of you. I'll take care of your animals. You're not going to spend the night outside. You're coming into my house, and I'm taking care of you. And so you can see what did they do for people? They provided for their animals and for their guests, together. And you can see the washing of the feet, all of this care for the guests. It seems like, again, this is a nice guy. Again, we don't know anybody's names. And this is, again, it seems like so far the story seems, well, it's kind of disconcerting that they didn't have anybody else welcome them, but it doesn't seem yet like anything really bad has happened other than people haven't been very hospitable. It's just seems like things are going to get figured out here, worked on.
While they were enjoying themselves, the men of the town, a depraved lot, had gathered about the house and were pounding on the door. They called to the aged owner of the house, "Bring out the man who has come into your house so that we can be intimate with him." The owner of the house went out and said to them, "Please, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. Since this man has entered my house, do not perpetrate this outrage. Look, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out to you. Have your pleasure of them. Do what you like with them, but don't do that outrageous thing to this man."
Okay, well, now it's gotten dark real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So we set up the first 10 verses. They're on their way. 14 verses later, now this has happened, and it's really, really, really bad. This has gone deliverance bad. uh, it's, I mean, the whole thing is nuts. So, look, a lot of people focus on what just happened with the guy, again, don't know his name, the guy who lives in Gibeah, the resident, the one who's the host, if you will. What just happened? He just said, take my daughter and this guy's concubine and rape them? Like, that's insane. Like, who would do that? That's your solution? So people have pointed that out. Now, people have pointed out also, on the contrary, that maybe he said it without the intention of people taking him up on that, right? He's basically saying, you can do that, but don't do this, but don't do either one. So people have said maybe that's really what's going on here, is that he's negotiating with them, but really saying, you don't want to do this either. Because what he really does is don't do anything outrageous. Don't do anything like this. Somehow you'll just get everybody to calm down and say, oh yeah, we'll go away. But that's one possibility. The other possibility is that things have gotten so bad that all kind of barriers to protecting anybody has gone down. It's broken down. So when we first started Judges, I said part of the kind of the theme for the book of Judges is it feels like the Old West, like the Wild West, the West where, some guy like Clint Eastwood has to ride into town to fix everything because everybody's gone off the rails. There's a corrupt sheriff, but there's also the people are corrupt and the people are treating each other badly. And it's just one of those movies where it's hard to find the good guy because everybody's bad. And so it's one of those kinds of, you almost get that feeling like there's just total lawlessness. And I think that's really what the purpose of this story and the previous stories, and to some extent, again, what Judges is really meant to do is to establish how things went off the rails. So in the end of the day, the blame for this doesn't fall on one person. It doesn't fall on these people or this one town in particular, but the whole system had gone bad.
Maybe could it be that when you look at the 10 Commandments, should not commit adultery. It's that a married man can have sex with like a prostitute, like we saw, but the woman who's married, she can't have sex because she's property, right? The progeny is supposed to belong to the man. So a concubine, it's not wrong for her to have sex with because she's not his wife. I don't know whether the children belong to him or, that women are, I guess they're property. And the rules say that a virgin girl doesn't belong to anybody, I guess, except her father. And the concubine, her children, that sounds wrong. I don't know how that.
No. I mean, it's not. The reality is that if there's, I guess there's lots of possibilities.
But maybe in the past they didn't see this as something so wrong. Maybe we're evolving and we're saying, hey, this is wrong.
No. You're going to see why. You're going to see why it's wrong. And he knows that this is crazy stuff is happening. Did he think that this was going to cause this riot?
On the one hand, it doesn't make sense. The concubine leaves him. He follows her to the father's house, spends a lot of time there, I don't know, merrymaking, negotiating, whatever. He leaves with her, and then he's willing to just throw her out.
It's the guy that owns the house is offering
the host that's doing it. So we don't know. Hold off. You might not be wrong, Reverend Lynn, in the sense that he doesn't seem to object to what's about to happen. But the reality is that it's the host that offers this negotiates here with the people. It's the owner of the house who said, don't do this. And again, this is the owner of the house in this case is like Lot, in the sense that he's a foreigner. He's not of that area. He's from Ephraim, right? So he's not.
Is he a Canaanite?
No, he's an Israelite. All these people in this story are Israelites. The interesting thing is that everybody here is an Israelite. The weird juxtaposition is that the Jebusites, they got a pass on this. Not only did they get a pass, they were like, well, I don't want to go there. That was the option. They pushed ahead a little longer to get to Gibeah because this guy, the guy from the traveler, if you will, decides he doesn't want to go to a Canaanite city. I want to go to a Jewish city. I'm not stopping in a Canaanite city. I'm going to a Jewish city. And that's the irony, right? Is that this happens in the Jewish city, that this happens with the way Israelites are treating each other. Again, part of what makes the story believable is the fact that the names are changed to protect the innocent, if you will. There's no innocence really in this, but I guess the concubine is. But the whole story definitely has this feeling like, no, this really happened and it was really bad, and people remembered it and they talked about it for a long time. Like this just stuck in people's mind. You'll see. We'll kind of look at those triggers where you can kind of see this. So here's what happens.
But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and pushed her out to them. They raped her and abused her all night long until morning, and they let her go when dawn broke. Toward morning, the woman came back, and as it was growing light, she collapsed at the entrance of the man's house where her husband was.
Right. So Reverend Lynn, point is, the guy threw his concubine out. It was not the host that ends up doing it. The man was.
Is that really clear though in the Hebrew that it's?
Yeah. It says, well, the he could be either one. When it says he threw him out, Vayushlahu, that is he did it. But Pilgeshu, that his concubine, means that it was his concubine. It wasn't the concubine, it was his concubine. So the man sees his concubine. It wasn't the host's concubine, it was his concubine. So he did. And so Reverend Lynn's point is, yes, in the end, the guy responsible for throwing her out and not protecting her is the guy who followed her. So,
right.
That's where you go, well, it doesn't make sense that he wanted her back so badly, and yet now he's willing to throw her out. Now, again, you can make the argument he's saving him. He's saving himself, right? He doesn't want to be attacked. Does the fact that she's a concubine now suddenly become important because she's the one that's raped. Now, nothing happened to the other girl, right? So his daughter, the host's daughter, doesn't get attacked. Only the concubine got attacked. And that's the word that's used. That they
or maybe the story only focuses on the concubine. Maybe something happened to the so-called virgin, and she's
listening. You could. I mean,
not important to the story.
You can have a midrash on what happens to her, right? That's an interesting midrash, right? My dad was willing to throw me outside to be raped.
Right.
That's the midrash there, which is go live with this one. Okay, so here's the thing. The Sodom and Gomorrah story is the same story. It's two women, take my two daughters. That's what Lot says. Take my two daughters, leave these guys alone. So the two daughters, the two women are now substituted for a concubine and a daughter, right? So it's almost like, again, we're making it very clear that these two stories are connected, right? Two women, throw them out, but they don't get thrown out in the Sodom and Gomorrah story. In this story, one of them for sure gets thrown out and gets raped. There is no angel to save her. Nobody saves her. So here the story goes, all set up exactly parallel, yet here it goes horribly wrong. They raped her and abused her all night. Now, again, like if you've never read this story, it's horrible. It's horrible. There's she's still alive, whatever. The story's horrible. There's no justice or feeling of well, it's just, this is a horrible story. But it gets worse, a whole lot worse. Maddeningly, horrifically, unimaginably worse. It's bad, horrible, but it gets worse. So this is a story of there's no angel here, folks. There's nobody that's going to intervene to save anybody in this story. That's where the whole story, again, the Sodom and Gomorrah story. Everybody knows the Sodom and Gomorrah story. Maybe, again, the Sodom and Gomorrah story is the cautionary tale, which then sets this story up, which was maybe really the story that everybody knew as there is nobody that's going to save you, and you have created a Sodom and Gomorrah here in our own community. So again, what was the real story as it happened? And again, as I said, the Sodom and Gomorrah story of destruction of those towns, we now pretty much have the evidence. We just got it in the last few years, the physical evidence that these cities literally got blown up in an instant, literally like the Bible described it. But what was the real purpose of the story? What was the takeaway from the story? In the Jewish tradition, it's don't be like Sodom and Gomorrah, for sure. Otherwise, God's going to destroy you. But here's the real kicker. If you don't read Judges' story, like we're doing right now, you miss the point. So here's what happens. After that great buildup of how bad it is, you decide.
When her husband arose in the morning, he opened the doors of the house and went out to continue his journey. And there was the woman, his concubine, lying at the entrance of the house with her hands on the threshold. Get up, he said to her, let us go. But there was no reply. So the man placed her on the donkey and set out for home. When he came home, he picked up a knife and took hold of his concubine and cut her up limb by limb into 12 parts. He sent them throughout the territory of Israel.
Okay, so before we read any more, probably the most horrific, unimaginable description of what happens to anybody in the Bible. Horrific. I mean, people die in horrific ways in battle and nothing we have in the Bible. That's why I say this is arguably the most horrific story of the Bible. Nothing like this happened in the Bible, described in the Bible. I mean, people suffer horribly with plagues, with disease. But this death of the first, I mean, it's horrible. Death of the firstborn, it's horrible. But this literally is like out of the most barbaric, horrific story you can imagine. I mean, this is worse than most Quentin Tarantino movies. I mean, this is literally like, if you have to visualize this, how does this not shake you? The whole scene is so horrifically barbaric and disturbing. You have to be disturbed by this story. I mean, you have to be. Otherwise, there's literally, people, you need to have help. If you're not sickened by this story, if this isn't hard to read, there's something wrong.
The story is terrible, but do they just see her as a concubine, that she's not a worth as a real human? Do you see that? I mean, they're treating her like a package or a commodity.
Well, there definitely seems to be that.
Now he just cuts her up and he's going to send her off to all the other, it's like it's a piece. This is my property that's been destroyed, and he's.
Okay, but again, as we said, this was a woman who he went to fetch to bring back.
I know.
He clearly wanted her back. it, even if you say it was for his honor or whatever, he definitely wanted her back. He spent time with her dad. He
Yeah, but maybe he just saw her as property, wanted his property back, like I left my shovel. I'm gonna go back again.
So look, this is why some people, and again, it doesn't really exist in the Jewish commentary, but there are some people who read this story as the woman cheated on her husband, and this is what happens to a woman who cheats on her husband. So I'm just telling you, this is not a Jewish reading of this text.
Okay.
There are scholars. There
It's like blaming the victim.
Yeah. So there are readings of this story that have it that the woman played the harlot, if you will, and then I have not.
But if it's a cautionary tale,
yeah.
who is it a cautionary tale for?
Well, the interesting thing is it's not really the one of the Jewish takeaways of this story is that a family crisis can spin out of control and wind up involving other people. So there is that lesson to this, but there is a bigger political. The takeaway, as we're going to get to from this story, is that first line: there was no king in Israel, so people did whatever they wanted.
Because there was no king.
Yeah. So everybody who's involved in this story goes off the rails. So the Jewish takeaway from this story is, what were the leaders doing? What was happening at the top that allowed for this kind of behavior? Where were the teachers? Where were the priests? Where were the people who were supposed to be instilling justice and righteousness with these people? They clearly have no fear, because not only did they rape this woman, but this guy's sense of justice, his response to get justice is to cut up basically his wife, his concubine, who if he didn't love, he cared a lot about her, cuts her up. I mean, that's nobody. You're never supposed to do that. even if you're making a call to justice, you don't cut up a person. I mean, that's the absolute abhorrent. Within Judaism, you don't defile a person when they die, even if they're your enemy. You don't do that.
You could say he was out of his mind with grief.
Other than the fact that he doesn't seem to, when he says to her, "Kum, get up," he doesn't seem to be. He doesn't seem.
He's indifferent.
He's like, get up.
Or he's in shock.
I guess, but the whole thing is that.
Although he pushed her out, though. That
he could have said
it's hard to reconcile his anger over what happened to her with the fact that he pushed her out in the first place.
Which is why the whole story. To me, that's one of the takeaways. Why I compare it to those Old West stories, which is like, who's the good guy, right? There is no good guy here. There's nobody. It's gotten so bad that there is nobody who can do the right thing. And again, we've kind of see it happen in the book of Judges, where, the last judge that we actually had was Samson, right? We had Samson, we had Jephthah, who are clearly flawed people. I mean, we start off with some pretty good judges. I mean, Deborah obviously doesn't seem to be anything wrong with Deborah, but by the time we get through these judges, the judges themselves are a little twisted. They don't seem to be able to go unscathed through their judging, if you will.
It's a little like an over-the-top Grimm's fairy tale.
It definitely seems to be a cautionary tale, right? But I'm telling you, there is at least we don't know for sure, but there's at least a kernel of truth to the story. The feeling of most biblical scholars is that this happened, that this story was not a made up, well, don't ever do this kind of tale. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah was most likely based on this story, not vice versa. And so this was, maybe this was the final straw, right? Maybe, the point of, why this is at the end of Judges. Now, there is a feeling that maybe this happened earlier in the time of Judges chronologically, but there is a feeling that this, and again, it could have, that being said, it doesn't mean it wasn't composed fairly late. Most people feel that this was fairly late composition. There are people that I'm going to mention kind of why, when we get to the politics of this, there's actually a political issue here. I'm not so sure that the political issue has to be as far as some people say it goes, but some people say it has a lot to do with King David and King Saul. Yeah, Don, what were you going to say?
Well, when you kind of mentioned that analogy, I guess kind of with the Old West, and maybe there is one in a way, is that, think of the Old West, well, you have the sheriff in these parts, but the sheriff in these parts always seems to be the one who, cleans it up after the deed is done wrong, but the law seems to be in everybody's hands. I mean, everyone's law is basically the, Smith and Wesson they're carrying around. So, maybe the message here is, hey, we all are supposedly granted with this right of free will, but naturally we know it can work both ways, and is the role of the judge or king or whoever is to say, hey, we're not going to necessarily are we really going to keep people from doing wrong things, or are we just going to deal with it after they've done wrong? And if you kind of look at where we are today, in 2020, are things really that much different? With, what is the role of the law and leaders to do? Is it to, we're not a totalitarian society where nobody dares do anything wrong with the risk of getting hanged or, their arms shot off? Or is it, hey, if you do this, this is going to be the consequences? So I don't know. Is there some kind of a message?
I will tell you on a good note. I was listening to one of the podcasts I listened to, Freakonomics. The reality is that we actually have a much lower murder rate today than we did 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. There was about 2,200 homicides a year in New York back in the 90s, early 90s, and now it's down to under 300 homicides.
Yeah, you got a lot more police officers out there, and probably the same thing here. But is it really putting people in prisons really going to reverse that versus just having cops out on the street?
That's what Freakonomics discusses. I won't get into all of the pieces that Freakonomics, because they actually the one I listened to from a couple of weeks ago revisits one of their most challenging and thought-provoking theories as economics or kind of looking at sociology and economics greater. So they looked at that, whether it was death penalty legislation, tougher laws, tougher sentencing. More police was definitely a big part of the thing. Having more people incarcerated was a big part of it. The largest part of it, my friends, that they found, and again, it's a lot of people call it a third rail argument, legalized abortion actually was what they found to be the biggest effect on a decrease in crime and violent crime, was the fact that unwanted children were not born. It's a very difficult thing for people to discuss, for them to hear. It does resonate with people because it kind of makes sense, but they actually revisit it. And I, if you're interested, listen to Freakonomics from a couple of weeks ago. It's in the book, the original book on it, but they revisited this claim. But again, you can't, we judge societies by how safe a person is, right? And whether it's a woman, it's a child, it's a man, it's it's we look at those things, and again, it's kind of our fear, right, is that we regress to that, all the dystopian things that we like, the science fiction that we like, and the Westerns. One of the reasons why we're so hung up on Westerns still is because it's our country, but it's a country where there's such lawlessness that, in the back of our minds, can it happen again? Right. I think that's part of why we like it, and why we even have Westerns. I don't know. I just started watching, I'm not a Star Wars nerd, but I'm definitely a Star Wars aficionado. And I went and started watching the Boba Fett. That's basically, Westerns, Mandalorian set in outer space. We have this kind of like love for, what happens if we pull out, the conventions of law and order, what happens. And again, those are the Westerns that people really, really love, whether it's, Silverado or The Unforgiven. What happens when you can't go to the law, right? What happens when the sheriff is corrupt, right? What happens when, Brian Dennehy is the sheriff, or whoever the in Unforgiven, it was Gene Hackman. I mean, those are great villains of, wow, what happens when the people that you're supposed to go to for justice are corrupt themselves. And so here it's almost an absence of that. Though the one thing the rabbis do is they do blame the leadership, in the sense that, what were they doing? Like, where were they? And so it's more of the blame really does get shifted to in Jewish thought, to the leaders, and why had they abdicated their responsibility? So why is this guy, why does he turn towards dismembering his concubine to do this? So let's see what happens when he does this.
And everyone who saw it cried out, "Never has such a thing happened or been seen from the day the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt to this day. Put your mind to this, take counsel and decide." So
the kicker is, they say nothing like this has ever happened. That this is really bad. We have not seen anything like this. And they said, since we come out
I feel better now. That they're not, that they see this as something bad, not like she's just a piece of meat that he's cut up and that's okay.
Yeah. So they know it's bad, but they got to this point, right? And so it's not like, so this is the worst thing, but we got to this point, right? So it's literally like, this is the breaking point, right? We got to this breaking point. And the way they say it is, nothing like this has ever happened. So yeah, the good news is that this is not normal, right? That it doesn't usually get this bad, but it got this bad because probably, again, it was happening more and more and more. And
it kind of makes you wonder, though, when, the comparison of, hey, he went to this particular town, if he went to some other cities, people would be friendly and, they take them in, but everyone here seems to be like, hey, I don't want to deal with a stranger. So it kind of makes you wonder what their overall morals were. And was this just an extreme example of, the kindling burst into a fire with what happened in this scenario?
Yeah, well, it seems like this is the worst example, but yes, it was getting bad, and now we went this far. So they know that it's gotten really, really bad. And so there's a response. There is now a political response. So this, again, started out with a family squabble, if you will, which degenerates and eventually encompasses the whole country. And it's weird because things like this happen, right? Folks, we've seen it in our lifetimes. We've seen family tragedies wind up encompassing the whole country. I mean, right? I think the most obvious one would be the O.J. Simpson situation, the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, right? That was that ended up was a horrible story, it was a horrible incident, it was a horrible lesson, whatever you want to call it. But think about how much time people spent involved in that trial. I mean, it took up so much of our attention. It was just unbelievable. I mean,
Because we're drawn to that, because we're
yeah, I mean, there's definitely
fascinated by it.
celebrity aspects to it, all the racial aspects of, there's so many things there that happen there. But it was, at the end of the day, there are unfortunately many murders that happen in family situations like that nobody knows the names of those people, right? You know, how many people during the course of that trial were murdered by their spouses and we never knew their names. So this happens. I mean, this we know that this is possible. Look, it doesn't have to be murder. I mean, think about how many people ended up getting emotional and getting drawn into this is another weird example, but the Elian Gonzalez, situation with a boy whose mother died and, ended up getting taken. I mean, everybody had an opinion. Everybody got drawn into that. It thankfully in that situation didn't involve murder, but it involved politics, and it involved, people trying to do what's best, and however there was different opinions on it. But the point is that it was a family situation that ended up taking the whole country down with them into this discussion. So it happens. So this is a case of everybody saying, what are we going to do? Now, in this case, it says everybody who saw this said, we got to do something about it. So
a question about translation. The take counsel and decide. Mine says take counsel and speak.
Yeah, the word daber, the dabru, which is daberu, it's and they plural would speak or decide. I think that the translation here in the Jewish text is more, taking it a little bit, not necessarily literally, the word daber, but the word daber can mean utso is take counsel, that's for sure. So it could be take counsel and discuss. I think that's a fair, probably maybe a better translation. Take counsel and let's discuss.
I thought the bear literally meant words.
Yeah, and again, usually means to speak. It does. So yeah, usually, but it doesn't just mean to speak. It also means like ele hadvarim. These are the words that Moses spoke. We know that just doesn't mean they're words, right? We know that these are the lessons, these are the decisions, these are the laws. It's Deuteronomy, ele hadvarim. In Hebrew, we call the book Devarim, the things. We wouldn't say the words. I mean, you could, but most people would say these are the things, these are the teachings, these are the Torah. This is the Torah, the second Torah. We call it also in Hebrew Mishneh Torah. So davar means words and things, but it also means, like more than just random things. Like things sounds like kind of like unimportant things. These are important things. So you don't want to say just words. I would say it was probably why it wouldn't, but I would say maybe discuss and counsel. It's definitely a synonym for counsel, maybe. And again, the translation decide is more, let's take counsel and then make a decision and come up with a decree, if you will. So that's why they went with that. So here's what they decreed. This is what they decide.
Thereupon, all the Israelites from Dan to Beersheba and from the land of Gilead marched forth, and the community assembled to a man before the Lord at Mitzpah. All the leaders of the people and all the tribes of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of God's people, 400,000 fighting men on foot.
So they get together at Mitzpah, which is, it's interesting because we're not sure which Mitzpah it is, but we think we're talking about an essential part of Israel in Mitzpah. it is a convocation of everybody, and 400,000 men, fighting men, come to Mitzpah, in addition to all the tribes, right? So this is like everybody comes to this gathering in Mitzpah. I mean, that's what it says. Maybe it's not like everybody, but it seems like a lot of people were there because 400,000 fighting men are there. And basically all the fighting men from the tribes seem to be there. Now, again, we're going to kind of see that maybe not everybody was there, but a lot of people are there. I mean, there's a lot of people that show up for this that are feel that they have to respond. So I'm just going to tell you something. As you read this, you think it doesn't make, I don't say make sense. That's not the right word. If it's overwhelming already, it's going to get more overwhelming. I mean, or at least we're going to add to the what just happened. That's just the I can't believe that just happened. It's already bad. It's only involved a family so far. You're going to see how many people get involved in this. 400,000 to start with, or let's say 1 million people, whatever. A lot of people join together. 400,000 of them are fighters. And here's what happens.
The Benjaminites heard that the Israelites had come up to Mitzpah. The Israelites said, "Tell us, how did this evil thing happen?" And the Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, replied, "My concubine and I came to Gibeah of Benjamin to spend the night. The citizens of Gibeah set out to harm me. They gathered against me around the house in the night. They meant to kill me, and they ravished," scroll, please.
Yep.
"And they ravished my concubine until she died. So I took hold of my concubine and I cut her in pieces and sent them through every part of Israel's territory, for an outrageous act of depravity had been committed in Israel."
Yep. So the guy explains what happened. That's a summary.
Yeah, but you notice he says she died. And then he cut her up. The other one doesn't say she died. It's not
Well,
like
it kind of implies it that he spoke to her. She didn't
And she didn't
answer.
respond. Yeah. Listen, the intention is that I believe that I know what you're saying. It doesn't. You can read it. You can read it that he kind of finished her off. I don't believe that that's what it says, but it doesn't. Gail, you're not wrong in saying that it doesn't say it. There's no question that he makes it clear here that they killed her. They raped her to death. They raped her to death. That's what they said. They raped her to death. And they tried to kill me first, right? So, that's also there. He doesn't say they just raped my concubine to death. They tried to kill me, which that's not actually what they said in the first place. They said they wanted to be intimate with him. But based on what they did to her, you can make the assumption that they would have done that to him. It's possible, but anyways, that's what he says. That's the way he phrases it. That's what he saw.
Yeah, I just read it like he was just as bad, that he cut her up and she was still
You know,
alive.
Well, I get the impression that maybe, there was so much distrust, because there are other stories where, you cut off a piece of the person in order to prove that it's really them and they're really dead. And it seems like that's what could be what's going on here, that the distrust had become between the tribes was so great that the only way he could convince them that this had really happened was to send out these body parts.
It's an interesting point, Rosemary. We haven't discussed usually in the past why he did what he did, in the sense that it's just so horrific to think. But
It's just horrible to think about. But that's what came to me was, other stories where they sent the finger, or I think I read a science fiction story once that I think was based on something that happened, about where they were trying to convince the government that this atrocity had happened, and they sent a hand or something like that. I think that there's
Yeah,
some real
well,
story behind that.
no one's ever going to forget the end of 7 either. So there are cut off body parts, even if it's something like an ear or a finger where the person didn't have to die, it
Mhm.
freaks out. There's no question about it. This was meant to make us
Statement, just what big statement.
this
Yeah.
is definitely and it accomplished its goal, right? You know, he got everybody there. And he says why he did what he did with cutting her up.
Yeah, it wasn't like a proof of life, cut off a finger. So, your son really is still alive. So send the money. I mean, here it's like, this stuff happened. This is what you get.
And so he got the right response, if you will.
Mhm.
So here's what he says to them.
Now you are all Israelites. Produce a plan of action here and now.
He says to them, what are we going to do? You got to do something. And here's what they do.
Then all the people rose as one man and declared, we will not go back to our homes. We will not enter our houses. But this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will wage war against it according to lot. We will take from all the tribes of Israel 10 men to the 100, 100 to the 1,000, and 1,000 to the 10,000 to supply provisions for the troops, to prepare for their going to Gibeah in Benjamin, for all the outrage it has committed in Israel.
So basically they're saying we're going to take 10% of our armies. It's a lot. It's a lot. Based on what they just said, it's 40,000, right? I mean, if 400,000 people show up to fight, we can go up again with 40,000 people. And against one city, against one town.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, you think, okay, in Homer, they send out the armies of Helena Troy back, but hey, she's alive. These guys are going at least to that extreme to basically try to, clean it up and say, hey, you shouldn't have done that.
Yeah. And here's the crazy thing. At this point, it's only one city. It's only Gibeah. It's only the Benjaminite town of Gibeah. So here's what happens. I mean, this is literally how the story keeps going down down and down.
So all the men of Israel, united as one man, massed against the town. And the tribes of Israel sent men throughout the whole tribe of Benjamin, saying, what is this evil thing that has happened among you? Come, hand over those scoundrels in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and stamp out the evil from Israel. But the Benjaminites would not yield to the demand of their fellow Israelites. So the Benjaminites gathered from their towns to Gibeah in order to take the field against the Israelites.
So does everybody get what just happened? Because this, as I said, the story doesn't, there are turnoff points from the story where it didn't have to get this way. And so the story just keeps like steamrolling, rolling down a hill where it gets worse and worse and worse. Because when the Israelites come against Gibeah to the Benjaminites, they say to the Benjaminites, turn these people over. Just turn them over. We'll punish them. Punish the culprits. And the Benjaminites say, no, we're not turning them over. And we're going to go essentially, and we're going to fight you, the rest of the Israelites. So the Benjaminites decide, we're not giving up. We're not giving up Gibeah. We're not turning in these people who are guilty. They're guilty. They're bad people. But the Benjaminites, again, their justification obviously is, you're not going to punish our people. Who are you to punish our people, right? So here's what happens.
On that day, the Benjaminites mustered from the towns 26,000 fighting men, mustered apart from the inhabitants of Gibeah, 700 picked men of all this force. 700 picked men were left-handed, Every one of them could sling a stone at a hare and not miss.
So 26,000 Benjaminites come up besides the people of Gibeah. Now, here's the crazy thing. 700 guys were special forces, if you will. And they are able to sling a stone at such great accuracy, literally, it says they can sling a stone at a hare and not miss. These are guys who are essentially, they're snipers, right? They're people who are like super soldiers, and they're left-handed. So what do? The Benjaminites, we see from this story, we learn a little bit about the Benjaminites. They are a smaller tribe, but they are a tribe of tough guys. And they seem to train their soldiers to train left-handed, the southpaws. And you see in those boxing movies where they train the guy to fight with his left hand, right? Tie down his right hand and make him fight with his left as a southpaw. That's because they have an advantage. They have an advantage when they're fighting in that they don't have to hold their sword in their right. And assumedly they could actually go back and forth and be ambidextrous. But no matter what, the normal shield sword situation, you can't defend against somebody who's left-handed with your normal strategy, your normal fighting techniques, your normal ways that you mount up against each other. It's not going to work against these guys. Now, the funny thing about this is that Benjamin means the son of my right hand. So it's either, again, they took it as a funny little thing that they would be left-handed, even though they're called the son of the right hand, which is considered the strength, the side of strength. The people who are right-handed were considered to be on the strong side, but the people on the left had an advantage fighting. And so it's not so much that they're necessarily stronger, but they're more agile, they're more adept, they're more cunning, and they're more efficient. And so you can't mess with these left-handed fighters. And it seems, again, that was what these Benjaminites did, which is important because we're going to learn about King Saul in the coming weeks. King Saul is from the tribe of Benjamin, which, by the way, again, can't leave that out when we get to Saul, but something to think of even now. The first king of Israel is from this tribe, the tribe of Benjamin. Again, Benjamin is the last son of Jacob,
Mark,
the baby of Rachel, the baby. Yes.
generation wise, how far are we from Saul?
Interestingly, maybe very close.
I was going to say, could Saul have been one of those 700 picked men who was left-handed?
Let's hold that off for a second, because the bigger issue is, as some people have said, that this story, well, I hold that off. I don't want to jump the gun on it, but yes, it might have something to do with Saul. But I do believe it has something to do with Saul. I don't believe to the extreme that some people say that this does. But keep in mind that this is Gibeah, right where Saul's from, right in that area, that sweet spot of the center of Israel, right near Jerusalem. Mizpah is where they all join together to confront each other. That's 10 miles away from Jerusalem. It's right in the center of the country and right there in Benjaminite heartland. DC, if you will. That's why all those battles were fought at Gettysburg and Virginia and all around those places where, it's the center. It's right by DC. It's right where the country was. What could have happened if Manassas had whatever. So this is where exactly the equivalent of where we are right now. So
The men of Israel, other than Benjamin, mustered 400,000 fighting men, warriors to a man. They proceeded to Bethel and inquired of God. The Israelites asked, "Who of us shall advance first to fight the Benjaminites?" And the Lord replied, "Judah first."
yeah, just keep that in mind. Back to Judith's point about what's going on here with the tribes, because Judah gets the lead. Judah gets the lead. That's the tribe of King David. So if there's a Judah Benjaminite little issue here, Judah's going first in the battle.
So the Israelites arose in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. The men of Israel took the field against the Benjaminites. The men of Israel drew up in battle order against them at Gibeah. But the Benjaminites issued from Gibeah, and that day they struck down 22,000 men of Israel.
Wow. 22,000. That's a huge amount of people that just died in a civil war. A civil war. 22,000 Israelites just died. First day of battle.
Now the army, the men of Israel, rallied and again drew up in battle order at the same place as they had on the first day. For the Israelites had gone up and wept before the Lord until evening. They had inquired of the Lord, "Shall we again join battle with our kinsmen, the Benjaminites?" And the Lord had replied, "March against them."
Yeah, and we don't know exactly how God replied that you're supposed to do this. But maybe they consulted the Urim and Thummim. Maybe they got a message, from the lights on the priestly breastplate. Whatever it is, God says, yeah, this is what you're supposed to do. And again, there's this kind of weird phrase here, Im b'nei Benjamin, that they translate as kinsmen, the Benjaminites, but the children of Benjamin, your achi, your brothers. I mean, the fact that we, even in battle, even when you're going against these people, we're not forgetting that these are our people. This is a civil war. These are Jews, Israelites killing other Israelites. Yeah. And God's given the green light.
The Israelites advanced against the Benjaminites on the second day, but the Benjaminites came out from Gibeah against them on the second day and struck down 18,000 more of the Israelites, all of them fighting men.
Yeah, and by the way, so now 40,000 people were killed. So they talked about 10% of their army. Well, 10% of their army that they just brought out got killed. 40,000 people in 2 days got killed by the Benjaminites. And they don't have that many. The Benjaminites don't have that many people. Now they're just wiped out 40,000 Israelites.
Then all the Israelites, all the army, went up and came to Bethel, and they sat there weeping before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening and presented burnt offerings and offerings of well-being to the Lord. The Israelites inquired of the Lord, for the ark of God's covenant was there in those days. And Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, ministered before him in those days. "Shall we again take the field against our kinsmen, the Benjaminites, or shall we not?" The Lord answered, "Go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hands."
So the rabbis are definitely, and the commentators over the years have definitely been concerned with what went on here, because it actually says that Phinehas was in charge. It's Aaron's grandson, the guy that we read about before. So however long that this is, to get back to Judith's question, Phinehas is still in charge. Now, again, Phinehas seems to have lived a really long time, because he's mentioned in the book of Numbers. He's the one who kills the Israelite and the Midianite at Baal Peor. but what's he doing? And the rabbis literally say, he screwed up. He didn't do his job, because if he did his job, things wouldn't have gotten like this. So the fact that this has gone, the whole place has gone to hell, is his problem. And it's interesting because the first priest that we're going to read about, the next priest, not the first priest, the next priest we're going to read about are the descendants of Itamar. His brother, Eleazar's brother was Itamar. The next brother of the next son of Aaron, and his sons Eli, and then Eli's sons Pinchas and Hophni are the ones in charge. It seems as though Pinchas actually got his power taken away, at least temporarily. That line of priests, the ones through Eleazar, that they get their power taken away because of Pinchas's ineffectiveness in dealing with the people and being a good leader, right? That he wasn't a good leader. And so God is saying, you're going to win today now. Well, why didn't you tell us that yesterday when we lost another 18,000 people, God? What was that about? And so again, the rabbis are kind of left with this idea that like everybody had to pay the price for what had happened. Like, this is not good. None of this is good. And folks, it's going to get worse. I know you're saying it can't get worse. Yeah, 40,000 people have died at least. Now, we don't know how many Benjaminites have been killed yet. Maybe not many, it seems. But 40,000 Israelite army soldiers from Judah, from Naphtali, from all these other tribes seem to have been killed now in 2 days. That's pretty bad. It's going to get worse. Promise you, this is like mind-boggling how bad this gets. And here's what happens.
Israel put men in ambush against Gibeah on all sides. And on the third day, the Israelites went up against the Benjaminites as before and engaged them in battle at Gibeah. The Benjaminites dashed out to meet the army and were drawn away from the town onto the roads, of which one runs to Bethel and the other to Gibeah. As before, they started out by striking some of the men dead in the open field, about 30 men of Israel. The Benjaminites thought, they are being routed before us as previously, but the Israelites had planned, we will take to flight and draw them away from the town to the roads. And while the main body of the Israelites had moved away from their positions and had drawn up in battle order at Baal Tamar, the Israelite ambush was rushing out from its position at Ma'ar Geva. Thus, 10,000 picked men of all Israel came to a point south of Gibeah, and the battle was furious. Before they realized the disaster was approaching, the Lord routed the Benjaminites before Israel. That day, the Israelites slew 25,100 men of Benjamin, all of them fighting men.
Yep. And so the Israelites put into effect the strategy or the tactic of a feigned retreat, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you come out, you start fighting, you lose some men, and then you retreat, and then the force thinks that you're dying, and let's go chase after them and kill them, and we'll rout them and we'll be done with them. Well, it's exactly what Israelites wanted to do, lure them out and get them out into the open field. And then they came at him from all sides and they killed him. They just wiped out Benjamin, wiped him out. Just wiped out 25,000 Benjaminites. So 40,000 Israelites have been killed so far. And today, on this day now, the third day, 25,000 Benjaminites. So we don't know how many other Benjaminites have been killed thus far. We don't know exactly how many more than 30 Israelites got killed this day. But so far, 65,000 people have been killed in a battle that all took place out of this horrible rape, murder, and now 65,000 people are dead, at least. And there's more.
Then the Benjaminites realized that they were routed. Now the Israelites had yielded ground to the Benjaminites, for they relied on the ambush which they had laid against Gibeah. Once one ambush quickly deployed against Gibeah, and the other ambush advanced and put the whole town to the sword. A time had been agreed upon by the Israelite men with those in ambush. When a huge column of smoke was sent up from the town, the Israelite men were to turn about in battle. Benjamin had begun by striking dead about 30 Israelite men, and they thought, they are being routed before us, as in the previous fighting.
Yeah, and so again, this is a explanation, greater detail of remembering what, reminding people what had happened, which is that it was all planned out. This was a planned attack of, again, sending, signals and messages, and it was a coordinated assault. It's a coordinated assault on Gibeah. And what does it say? The whole town was put to the sword. That means men, women, and children. That means everybody's killed. It means everybody in Gibeah was killed.
But when the column, the pillar of smoke, began to rise from the city, the Benjaminites looked behind them, and there was the whole town going up in smoke to the sky. And now the Israelites turned about, and the men of Benjamin were thrown into panic, for they realized that disaster had overtaken them. They retreated before the men of Israel along the road to the wilderness, where the fighting caught up with them. Meanwhile, those from the towns were massacring them in it.
Yeah, so again, this is the description kind of from the Benjaminites side, which is what they saw, which is they ran out of the town to defeat the rest of what they thought the rest of the Israelites. And as they did that, the Israelites ran back into Gibeah and killed everybody. And so now they realized that the Benjaminites realized that it's over. They're doomed. Not only did the town that they had mustered together to defend is now down, is gone. They're now outside of the city walls, and they're done. They're done too.
They encircled the Benjaminites, pursued them, and trod them down from Menuha to a point opposite Gibeah on the east. That day, 18,000 men of Benjamin fell, all of them brave men. They turned and fled to the wilderness, to the rock of Rimmon, but the Israelites picked off another 5,000 on the roads, and continuing in hot pursuit of them up to Gidom, they slew 2,000 more.
So here you have 25,000 people being killed. So it seems like it's another 25,000, but it's really these 20. This is the description of how those 25,000 people got killed in Benjamin. So this is really the micro version, on the field version of what happened when those 25,000 people were killed. It's not a different 25,000. This is the 25,000 people. 18,000 men fell, and then as they ran back to Rimmon, 5,000 were killed, and then they went on to Gidom. And as they're retreating through Benjamin, they're basically going from Gibeah to Rimmon, the rock of Rimmon, and then they're going to Gidom. And as they're retreating, they're just getting wiped out.
Thus, the total number of Benjaminites who fell that day came to 25,000 fighting men, all of them brave. But 600 men turned and fled to the wilderness, to the rock of Rimmon. They remained at the rock of Rimmon 4 months.
Yeah. Now, they called them Anshe Chayil. They called them brave men, brave soldiers. So even though they're wiped out, there's this recognition that these are brave people, that these were not, cowards. These were brave people. So even though they're their, enemies, these are Israelites too, on the other hand, right? They're one of the tribes, but there's this recognition that they were brave. And, look, it says 600 of them fled out into the mountains, hid out into the caves, refugees, if you will. Look, I've read a lot about Robert E. Lee, and there's still obviously an intense fascination with whether he was the greatest American military mind of all times. There was no question that, as we can see, that he still holds a special place in the hearts of people who he helped kill. So effectively kill. And we know what happened to him after the war. They took away his plantation and turned it into Arlington Cemetery. I mean, these are parts of American history, but clearly, there was oftentimes a respect given to the people who were your enemies, even if they were responsible for horrible things. And the fact that they're of your own people, if you will, makes it maybe a little bit easier. It's a little harder to feel that way about your the opposing soldiers if they're from another country and they're another ethnicity or they're another whatever. But when they're your own people and this is a civil war, there's a kind of, in some cases, a grudging admiration or an outright fawning over these people. I mean, not least of which, Robert E. Lee went to West Point. Folks, these are facts. These are people who, interacted before the Civil War. Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant they knew each other. I mean, these are people who interacted and had relationships, rivalries, if you will, or again, interesting relationships before the war in some cases. So this is not, we know of these things. And they're very tragic when it happens in a civil war. So here's what happens with this weird, most of the murder is over, thankfully. Not all, but it's you can see.
The men of Israel, meanwhile, turned back to the rest of the Benjaminites and put them to the sword, towns, people, cattle, everything that remained. Finally, they set fire to all the towns that were left.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's what happens. Lots more people died. And the carnage is over now at the end of chapter 20. Thankfully, this is it. I mean, more people. We don't even know how many more people died. Just everybody. Benjaminites wiped out. Just terrible. It's a terrible situation. We've now essentially depopulated a tribe. But well, what do you do now? And that's what we're going to finish with this last chapter now. What do you do now? We wiped out a tribe. So most of the carnage is over. It's not all over, folks. Don't worry. The story gets another level of weirdness to it. But yes, thousands of people have died, men, women, and children, all coming out of a situation that should never have happened, yet was again started out as a family tragedy, a tragedy that involved one family, one city. And look what ends up happening.
Now the men of Israel had taken an oath at Mitzpah. None of us will give his daughter in marriage to a Benjaminite. The people came to Bethel and sat there before God until evening. They wailed and wept bitterly. And they said, "O Lord, God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel that one tribe must now be missing from Israel?" Early the next day, the people built an altar there, and they brought burnt offerings and offerings of well-being. The Israelites asked, "Is there anyone from all the tribes of Israel who failed to come up to the assembly before the Lord?" For a solemn oath had been taken concerning anyone who did not go up to the Lord at Mitzpah. He shall be put to death.
Yeah, so they're upset. We wiped out a tribe of Israel, but they're not done. Is there anybody who didn't take part in this? Is there anybody who didn't provide troops, didn't do what they were supposed to do in this battle, this horrible battle that we've wiped out a tribe? But is there anybody else that needs to be punished? Whoa, as I said, it's not over.
The Israelites now relented toward their kinsmen, the Benjaminites, and they said, "This day one tribe has been cut off from Israel. What can we do to provide wives for those who are left, seeing that we have sworn by the Lord not to give any of our daughters to them in marriage?"
Yeah, and you can kind of see what's happening here. they're asking a couple questions. Well, we can't be without a tribe. Can't be missing a tribe, but we can't do anything about it because we're not having anything to do with these Benjamites. And did anybody else not participate in this battle? Who didn't participate in this battle? Maybe we can kill two birds with one stone, if you will. That's the craziness of this story.
They inquired, is there anyone from the tribes of Israel who did not go up to the Lord at Mitzpah? Now, no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the camp, to the assembly, for when the roll of the troops was taken, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was present.
Oh, so Jabesh Gilead, which is an area in Manasseh and the Gilead in the area of Golan and the Golan Heights. Where were they? They didn't come up. They didn't send anybody. These guys up in Jabesh Gilead. Now again, we don't know why exactly for sure. Maybe they didn't like. Maybe they had no issue with the Benjaminites. Maybe they were cool with the Benjaminites. I don't want to fight the Benjaminites. There are people. By the way, this is why we're going to get to it in a second. Keep this in mind, Jabesh Gilead, because there's a political connection to this story, folks. And this is why maybe it has a little bit to do with King Saul, as we suggested before.
So the assemblage dispatched 12,000 of the warriors, instructing them as follows: go and put the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead to the sword, women and children included. This is what you are to do. Prescribe every man and every woman who has known a man carnally. They found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 maidens who had not known a man carnally, and they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan.
What? What? Did that just happen? That just happened. Huh. They killed two birds with one stone, if you will. They punished Jabesh Gilead, and they wound up with some women for the Benjaminite survivors. What a weird story. There are other similar stories to this in other legends of people. The one that comes to mind most prominently has to do with early Roman history.
Yeah.
The rape of the Sabini, the Sabine women, as it's oftentimes depicted in artwork, which is one of the weirdest things. Like, we need more pictures of the rape of these women. But yeah, it's part of the Roman history, the history of early Rome, how these tribe were essentially, they stole the women from this area and took them and had babies with them. Well, this is the story of Jabesh Gilead, young women who were taken and given over to Benjaminites. Here's what it said.
Then the whole community sent word to the Benjaminites who were at the rock of Rimmon and offered them terms of peace. Thereupon the Benjaminites returned, and they gave them the girls who had been spared from the women of Jabesh Gilead, but there were not enough of them.
Oh no. There's 400 for you, but we don't have enough for everybody. There's not enough to go around. Folks, this story, I told you, it doesn't end. Like, you killed the people. Okay. You punished them. No, it's not over. You punish the city. It's not over. There's more women we need to get. It just doesn't end. And it all started from this one story of a horrific gang rape. And now, where does it end? It's close, but it's horrific.
Now the people had relented toward Benjamin, for the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. So the elders of the community asked, what can we do about wives for those who are left, since the women of Benjamin have been killed off? For they said, there must be a saving remnant for Benjamin, that a tribe may not be blotted out of Israel. Yet we cannot give them any of our daughters as wives, since the Israelites had taken an oath, cursed be anyone who gives a wife to Benjamin. they said, the annual feast of the Lord is now being held at Shiloh. It lies north of Bethel, east of the highway that runs up from Bethel to Shechem and south of Lebanon. So they instructed the Benjaminites as follows: go and lie in wait in the vineyards. As soon as you see the girls of Shiloh come out to join in the dances, come out from the vineyards, let each of you seize a wife from among the girls of Shiloh and be off for the land of Benjamin. And if their fathers or brothers come to us to complain, we shall say to them, be generous to them for our sake. We could not provide any of them with a wife on account of the war, and you would have incurred guilt if you yourselves had given them wives.
Yeah, so we made a promise not to give them wives, but we're going to let them capture wives. So again, when we talk about this concubine, which is, again, I didn't want to split hairs on what's going on with a concubine, because the story ends with dozens of women being taken away as wives without their consent, without the fathers or brothers being able to say anything about it. Shut up, be quiet. We can't do anything about it. We were caught. We're in a between a rock and a hard place. We made a promise. We're not going to marry. We can't marry them off to our daughters willingly. But if they capture them, we're not going to say anything. I mean, well, this is insane. This is the happy ending to this story, that the Benjaminites aren't destroyed. Folks, the Benjaminites, well, we'll get to it, but this is how the Benjaminites survive. They survive because they took wives illegally, captured, kidnapped women from other Israelites at a religious function, folks, at a religious function. The women from Shiloh, the girls are coming out to dance. According to tradition, according to the Midrash, this is a Tu B'Av. This is the Valentine's Day celebration, if you will. It's astounding. They know it's not right, but they're just like, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? You have permission to go pick off women while they're dancing at the party.
The Benjaminites did so. They took to wife from the dancers whom they carried off, as many as they themselves numbered. Then they went back to their own territory and rebuilt their towns and settled in them. Thereupon the Israelites dispersed, each to his own tribe and clan. Every one departed for his own territory. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did as he pleased.
And my friends,
that's your moral.
Last line of Judges. So we heard at the beginning there was no king in Israel. And now you understand.
Is this a justification for kings? Because
there has to, and this
I guess historically there was a prohibition against kings.
Yeah, and so the problem was, again, what happens when the choices are bad choices, right? You know, we have no solution, and what do we do with women who, you know, what do we do with a tribe that we're going to extinguish? What do we do? And so what we're left with, and this is so typical of the Bible, we don't have a choice. This is our best option. We're left with bad choices, and so we have to do this. And so, yeah, we don't want to have a king, but the moral of the story is we have to have a king, because otherwise there's not going to be any. We can't have this. There's no way for us to continue like this. So the tribal situation, there's no authority from at some point. This is the flaw of the judge situation, which is, well, we'll get a leader when we need it. You know, look, you know, democracy has done very well for the last 200 or so years in the United States. According to polls that I recently read, there's a whole lot of Americans that are saying, nah, we don't need democracy. You it's scary. And look, there's flaws to democracy. We know that. I mean, that's what was, I guess Winston Churchill said,
Work from a government except for all the others.
yeah, we can't, what else are we going to do? So we know that. I mean, we know that, Hitler received a plurality of the vote. He didn't win the election in Germany, but he got the most votes. That's where people always say, well, he wasn't popularly elected but he got the most votes. He got to put together his coalition because he got the most votes. That's the fact. I was always raised with this idea that Hitler wasn't popular. He was popularly elected. More people voted for him for the National Socialist Party than any other party in Germany in 1932 elections. It's a fact. So it can happen. People can vote. If in a democracy, they can vote for whoever they want. The issue is that, we know that there's flaws to the system. We know they knew there was a flaw. Not only was there a flaw, they're not supposed to have a king. And so they have to have a justification for it. They have to have a justification for what they're about to do, which is that we're about to have a king. That's what the book of Samuel is about. Now, we have a tradition of saying, Tam v'neshalem tehillah el borei olam, that we give praise to God, the creator of the universe. Look, folks, God just gave us a story where their people just do horrible, horrible things to each other. And we literally are left, we just got kicked in the gut. I mean, we literally, at the end of the story, it just keeps getting weirder and weirder. And like, there's no solutions. Like, where do you turn? Like, I don't even, who are the heroes? At the end of the story, the voice of reason is go out and kidnap women so that your tribe doesn't disappear. Folks, the tribe of Benjamin is the tribe of King Saul, as we're about to read. He has an alliance with the people of Jabesh Gilead, which is unusual because he's from the kind of the center, and Jabesh Gilead is the far northeast regions. There seems to be a connection, look, which is why some people say that this story actually is not a story. It's a story that's hiding a message. And I believe that there is a message here, but I don't believe to this extent. There are some people who believe that after King David became king, he went on a rampage and killed a lot of Benjaminites because that was King Saul's tribe. And the best way to get rid of King Saul's people was to kill as many of his people as possible, which is that there was a rampage on the tribe of Benjamin that happened during the time of David, which this story is kind of a hidden message for. I don't believe that's the case. I believe that there are enough clues in the book itself of Samuel that we're about to turn to that we can read about what King David did. King David did kill pretty much all of King Saul's family afterwards. We know that. I mean, it's not a secret. It's there. It's been obscured a little bit, but it's there. But I don't believe that they destroyed all the tribe of Benjamin afterwards. I honestly believe that Benjamin was a tribe that did their own thing. And from the very beginning, we learned that Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, which is what the blessing is, or the curse of Benjamin. Benjamin they were fighters. They were right in the middle of everything. And they were constantly, kind of in the midst of stuff, but they're a tribe of action. And again, sometimes it was really, really bad. This is really, really, really bad. The rabbis, again, there's a teaching that we don't hide this story, that we're supposed to, the Talmud says you're supposed to publicly read this story. You're not supposed to obscure the story. You're supposed to tell the stories. We're supposed to tell the stories, that even the stories that make us look bad. But, again, did Pinchas screw up? Who screwed up? Somebody screwed up, because this isn't what was supposed to happen. And tens of thousands of people die because of a horrible story that the rabbis even will say, look, if the guy hadn't, here's the weird thing. Not only do the rabbis not blame the victim, they blame the guy in the first place who who didn't send his wife, drove his concubine out of the house. If he had left his wife alone and not been a jerk, this whole story wouldn't have happened. So they actually blame him, just so you know. The rabbis in the Talmud blame the guy. They blame the unnamed guy from Ephraim who does this. But are there other political things here? Absolutely. And again, it goes back even to Genesis, and the secrets or the codes are there, because what does Rachel call her son when he's born? Jacob's the one who calls him Benjamin, the son of my right hand, the son of my strength. She calls him Ben-Oni, the son of my suffering. And the rabbis say that Rachel knew what was going to happen to the tribe of Benjamin, that she knew that Benjamin tribe would meet this horrible fate. And so she called them Ben-Oni, the son of my suffering, the son of my sadness, then, because she knew. But Benjamin doesn't disappear. The interesting thing about the Benjaminites is they're one of the tribes that seems to have gone into exile, right? We know that Judah does, because we're the descendants of Judah. We're Jews or descendants of Judah. But the Benjaminites, even though we don't know exactly who's from the tribe of Benjamin after the destruction of the temple and after the exiles, we know that Benjaminites survived. Why? Who's a Benjaminite, folks? Who are Benjamin? I don't say who are Benjaminites? There's a couple, I wouldn't say a couple, there is a uncle and niece that are Benjaminites.
Oh, Mordecai and Esther.
Yep. They're from the tribe of Benjamin. They're from King Saul's tribe. They're from this tribe. They're from this tribe of fighters. They're people who don't, you don't count these people out. And that's the interesting thing about the Benjaminites, is that somewhere in the back of our early history, there are these Benjaminites that are out there that are, they're definitely not always doing good things, because the Gibeah people were not good people. The Bible flat out says they're scoundrels. There's nothing good about what they do. It's all bad. But the Benjaminites said, look, they were wrong. They should have turned over the culprits, but they also said, you're not going to kill our tribe. You're not going to kill our people. You're not going to attack our people. There's a certain amount of pride for that, which again, they pay the price for that. But they also are there. These people don't go down. These people are not people that you're going to take advantage of them, for sure. And we're going to see that in the interesting story of King Saul, one of the next. Difficult to call him a hero, but it's also difficult to say he's not he definitely has some heroic qualities. He has some very tragic qualities, King Saul, but he's from this tribe. And keep this in mind as we read the story of King Saul, that this is what happened. And again, Judith, we don't know how much in the past this happened. On one hand, it says it happened during the time of Pinchas, but on the other hand, based on where it's placed in the book of Judges, it's darn close to King Saul. So how close back was King Saul from this? How many generations ago was maybe his mother or grandmother, one of these women that was taken at Shiloh or taken from Jabesh Gilead? Think about it. It's not that far. It couldn't be more than 150, 100 years. In the worst case, in the longest case, that's how distant this is in King Saul's background. So
couldn't it also have been like Pinchas the third?
No, because it says Pinchas, the son of Eleazar. It says it. It says who he is. This is Pinchas. No, look, I mean, the problem is how, the rabbis are left with, the Pinchas was like 200 years old or this happened early on, and therefore that's why it's here. But look, I mean, Benjamin is, they're punished, but we never forget the fact that, Rachel died giving birth to this son, right? And now they're almost wiped out. And it's almost as if like there's this connection to Rachel that is, and there's stories we're going to read about King Saul and even Mordecai and Esther, which go back to Rachel. And there's this feeling like there's almost this divine connection to a tribe, to a person, to people that are living on the cusp of destruction. And in that way, the Benjaminites, to some extent, encapsulate and represent the Jewish people better than anybody. It's easy to say, well, we're descendants of King David, but we're also the descendants of Esther. We're also the descendants of Mordecai and Esther. And Esther is the one who risks her life and literally is put in a position where she could die. And the precarious position that Esther is in is like the tribe of Benjamin and is like Rachel to some extent, who in her last breath brings Benjamin into existence. It's a really interesting, they're almost a metaphor, as I'm saying, for all of Israel. So, look, as I said, the rabbis didn't, we don't discuss this. There's not a lot of midrash about this, but look, one of the takeaways the rabbis would say is that people just didn't do their job. I mean, the leaders didn't do their job. People should have known better. They should have. There were so many places where the story could have gone a different direction. There were so many opportunities for someone to intervene and say, "Stop, enough." Done. We're punishing these people. We're going to. There's so many places where the wrong decision was made, and in the end, it's just a train wreck. So it's an amazing story. It's one that, again, you can't read it without being you get shaken by this story, by the personal level and also on the national level, the political level. What happens when people can't come up with solutions, and to that extent, it is a highly relevant story, because there is definitely a feeling sometimes in our country right now, in our world, where you feel like can't we make another decision? Can't we get out of this? Isn't there? We see what's happening. We see this collision course that we're on right now. Isn't there a way for us to get off of it and make another decision and not have a train wreck, not force us into conflict that's going to wind up killing lots of people, and at the same time, again, we like parts of us know better. So it's frustrating to read this and not feel like we're caught in a Gibeah right now. We're all not living in Gibeah right now. We're just sometimes the innocent civilian who's caught in the midst of this. So with that, folks, again, thank you everybody for joining us and being part of the end of Judges. I promise you, if you were shocked and shaken by Judges, at least the end of Judges, you will be throughout the book of Samuel, which we're about to turn to next week. Samuel is the closest thing to the book of Samuel. Both parts of it, part 1 and 2, are the closest thing to The Godfather, not West Wing, what's that, House of Cards. I don't even know what to say. There's stuff in there that nobody's ever effectively reached the complexity and the power and the narrative power of the book of Samuel. Let's put it this way. As a book, as a story, as a history that probably really did happen, though we don't have proof of it, but there seems to be a reportage that is too real. It's in some ways it's been unmatched, and so there's no character in the Bible that we learn more about, that we hear more about, that we live more with than King David, and nobody has, I don't think, in almost any literature, has captured a character who's more important and who's more, at the same time, more complex than King David. So we're gonna get into King David not right away. We first read about Samuel, and we read about a little bit about King Saul, but not a lot. We almost immediately go into most of the book of Samuel 1 and 2. Both parts are about King David. So if you think you know David, you probably probably need to read with us. So everybody take care, and please, everybody stay healthy, stay positive. We will hopefully see you in person whenever we can in a safe way, but most importantly, keep smiling, everybody, and keep healthy. Thanks everybody for being here today.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Rabbi
you.
Mark.
If you're
Thank
around,
you.
we'll see you Wednesday night for
Yes.
Genesis, for the binding of Isaac. Not much bigger than that.